There's a certain kind of man a woman never forgets, not because he was the loudest, the richest, or the most charming, but because she could never fully figure him out. While most men either collapsed to please or overcompensated to impress, he remained still, present, unmoved. He didn't fight for attention. He didn't beg for affection. He didn't chase approval like a starving man chasing scraps. He simply was. And that calm, calculated presence, it didn't make her feel dominant. It made her feel exposed. You see, women don't fear kindness. What they fear, whether they admit it or not, is a man whose emotions cannot be used against him. A man who feels deeply, but never loses control. A man who listens without reacting, speaks without performing, and walks away without anger. Because that man cannot be manipulated. He cannot be baited. He cannot be bent. And when emotional intelligence is housed inside masculine restraint, it becomes something rare, something dangerous. He doesn't threaten, he doesn't overpower, but his very existence forces others to face themselves. And that, more than anything, is what makes him unforgettable. This is the man she didn't see coming. This is the man she couldn't control. And this is the kind of man you're about to become. Most men misunderstand what women truly fear. They believe if they're just kind enough, soft enough, agreeable enough, they'll earn love. They learn to stay quiet during conflict, to over-apologize after tension, to perform emotional labor in the hope that their goodness will be rewarded. But Machiavelli would see through this illusion instantly. Because what a woman fears isn't a man who's too nice. What she truly fears is a man who she can't influence, a man she can't pull into emotional submission, a man who cannot be shifted by silence, baited by mood swings, or guilted by expectations. It's not that she wants to control him, it's that she wants to know he won't collapse if she ever tries. A kind man who folds under pressure is not safe. He is sweet, he is generous, but he is fragile, and deep down, she knows it. She may never say it out loud, but she will feel it. And eventually, she will test it. What she wants, what unnerves her in equal measure, is a man who can carry his own center through her storms. A man who can recognize emotional games for what they are, but doesn't punish her for them. A man who doesn't need to attack, avoid, or explain because he already sees the landscape clearly and chooses to move with precision. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And here's the paradox. The man who is truly emotionally intelligent doesn't need to prove anything. His restraint speaks louder than another man's persuasion. His silence cuts through more noise than a raised voice. His refusal to chase creates the kind of space where truth has nowhere to hide. This is the kind of man a woman both fears and respects. Not because he controls her, but because she can't control him. And that's not domination. That's leadership. That's self-possession. That's what happens when kindness is no longer a performance, but a choice made from strength, not fear. There will come a moment in every relationship, whether it's the third date or the third year, when a shift happens. The warmth fades just slightly. Her replies grow shorter. Her voice cools. Her energy changes, and something in you begins to stir. Most men, at this point, panic. They lean in. They ask, "Are you okay?" They send longer messages, trying to close the emotional gap. They apologize for things they didn't do. They scramble for connection not out of love, but out of fear. And the moment they do, they lose the frame. Because they didn't respond to the moment, they reacted to the discomfort. But the emotionally intelligent man, he moves differently. He notices the shift, of course. He feels it. He doesn't pretend to be numb. But instead of reacting, he pauses. He watches. He lets the silence speak for itself. He knows that not every cold spell is an attack. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's unconscious. Sometimes it's emotional bait. And the man who jumps too quickly reveals the one thing she's unknowingly probing for: insecurity. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago. He who cannot control himself is easier to conquer than a city. That truth has not changed. In a world full of men who raise their voices, type faster when they're upset, or fold under emotional tension, the man who pauses, who does nothing at first, is rare. And in that rare stillness, there is power. He doesn't retaliate, he doesn't shrink, he doesn't play emotional tug-of-war. Instead, he waits for clarity. And when he speaks, he does so without volume, without accusation, without defensiveness. His words are measured, his tone calm. Not because he doesn't care, but because he refuses to be pulled into chaos he didn't create. And here's what happens when a woman sees this. She recalibrates. She feels the depth of a man who will not dance to every shift in her emotion. A man who cannot be provoked or puppeteered. A man who sees the game, but never plays it by her rules. That unsettles her not in a cruel way, but in a way that commands respect. Because women don't test men to break them. They test them to find out where they bend. And when they find a man who doesn't bend but doesn't need to break her either, something rare is awakened. That's not emotional coldness. That's centered masculinity. The kind that doesn't resist her emotions, but refuses to be ruled by them. And that, in the quiet battlefield of relationships, is the first move of a man who cannot be conquered. Most men enter relationships carrying an invisible hunger, the need to be liked, to be approved, to be seen as good enough. It's subtle at first, laughing a little too hard at her jokes, agreeing just to avoid conflict, over-explaining when she seems unimpressed. He's not trying to manipulate. He's trying to stay chosen. But that hunger has a smell, and whether she realizes it consciously or not, she senses it. Because the man who needs to be liked is the easiest to control. But the emotionally intelligent man plays a different game. He doesn't wait to be chosen. He already chose himself. He walks into the room with a quiet, knowing, not arrogance, but certainty, not performance, but presence. On the first date, she tests him with a sharp comment. A little jab about his ambition, or the way he talks, or something from his past. Most men nervously laugh, deflect, or try to recover by proving their worth. But he doesn't take the bait. He smiles, pauses, says, "Interesting comment," then moves on. No defense, no justification, no collapse. And that single moment speaks louder than any monologue ever could. Because she just witnessed something rare: a man who doesn't trade authenticity for approval. A man who doesn't adjust his truth just to stay in her good graces. A man whose identity isn't for sale. Machiavelli said it clearly: he who seeks to please will always serve. That's the law. The moment you chase validation, you position yourself beneath the one you're chasing. But the man who approves of himself doesn't need to argue to be understood. He doesn't perform to be liked. He doesn't react to pressure because he knows exactly where he stands. And that kind of grounded confidence, it doesn't need to scream. It's felt instantly. She may not know what to do with it at first. She may even push harder, try again to find the crack. But there isn't one. Because the man who's chosen himself doesn't need to be rescued, rewarded, or reassured. He is whole. And that wholeness creates a tension she can't explain, a kind of magnetism she can't fake. He's not trying to be charming. He's not trying to win her. He's already won the only game that matters, the one inside himself. One of the most disarming traits a man can possess is the ability to read a woman without needing to control her. It sounds simple, even obvious, but very few men ever embody it. Most men, when confronted with emotional shift, silence, coldness, mood, swings, fall into two camps. They either try to fix her by logic, forcing the truth out with questions and pressure, or they retreat, shutting down, growing passive-aggressive, pretending not to care while their pride slowly bleeds. But the emotionally intelligent man moves differently. He notices the mood shift. He hears the shortened tone, feels the emotional temperature drop, sees the slight withdrawal, but he doesn't react. He doesn't over-ask. He doesn't demand. He doesn't interpret her discomfort as an attack on his masculinity. He simply asks, once, with clarity and warmth, "Is something on your mind?" And when she says no, she often doesn't press. He doesn't accuse, he gives space, he watches. Then later, when her storm has passed and the truth can breathe, he returns not to interrogate, but to understand. That kind of restraint is rare, and that kind of awareness is unnerving. Because most women are used to emotional leverage. They've seen how easily men fold, how quickly they react to silence, how desperately they reach for clarity, for connection, for control. But when she meets a man who isn't triggered by her tests, who doesn't fall into the trap of chasing clarity where none is offered, something shifts. The power dynamic recalibrates. She realizes she can't bait him into chaos. She can't pull him off balance, because he's not playing defense. He's playing chess. This isn't coldness. This is mastery. And mastery, when expressed through calm emotional awareness, is power she cannot manipulate. The emotionally intelligent man does not fear her fluctuations. He doesn't punish her for them. He simply doesn't let them determine the quality of his presence. He remains steady, observant, kind, but not submissive, open, but not porous. And in that presence, something deeper happens. She feels seen not because he extracted the truth from her, but because he made space for it to arrive on its own. No pressure, no panic, just precision. Machiavelli might call this psychological positioning. You don't need to control what you can already predict. You don't need to dominate what cannot destabilize you. The man who can read a woman without needing to rewrite her becomes the one she trusts not because he demands it, but because he never needed it to lead her energy. He doesn't try to fix her. He doesn't try to save her. He understands her. And in doing so, he becomes the calm she didn't know she was searching for. Conflict is inevitable. In any real connection, emotions will rise, misunderstandings will surface, and pressure will test the bond. But what separates the average man from the emotionally intelligent one isn't how he fights, it's how he refuses to escalate. While most men get louder when they feel disrespected, while they raise their voice to reassert control or defend their ego, the grounded man does something different. He slows down. When voices rise, he lowers his tone. When accusations fly, he asks questions. When blame floods the room, he waits, breathes, and then speaks with clarity, not to dominate, but to direct. Because he understands that emotional chaos is not his battlefield, it's her test. And she's not looking to destroy him. She's looking to see if he'll destroy himself. That's why the man who can hold his center in the middle of emotional fire becomes the most powerful man in the room. Not because he wins every argument, but because he's never at the mercy of one. He leads not with volume, but with gravity. His presence sets the tone. His composure commands attention. He isn't avoiding the fights, simply refusing to fight on her terms. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote, "A prince must learn how not to be good when the situation demands it." Translated into emotional leadership, a man must know when to be firm, when to be soft, and when to walk away in complete silence. The man who can master all three holds a level of respect that doesn't need to be requested, it's given freely, because it's felt. And here's the effect. When a woman realizes she cannot escalate you, when she sees that no matter how high the waves get, you are the unmoving shoreline, something inside her shifts. The drama stops needing oxygen. The chaos begins to dissolve. Not because you forced peace, but because you refused to fuel war. You don't win by overpowering. You win by staying in control of yourself. And that kind of control, it changes everything. Most men are terrified of female emotion, not because they admit it, but because they don't know what to do with it. When a woman becomes upset, passionate, unpredictable, or confrontational, most men instinctively either withdraw or try to match her intensity. They walk on eggshells, trying not to trigger anything worse, or they explode, trying to reassert control. Either way, they fail. Not because they're weak, but because they're reactive. Because they think emotion is something to escape or overpower. But the emotionally intelligent man sees it differently. He doesn't fear her emotions. He guides them. He doesn't avoid confrontation. He doesn't flinch at volume. He doesn't collapse when the emotional energy in the room shifts from warm to wildfire. Instead, he holds eye contact. He breathes deeper. His voice slows down, not speeds up. His body doesn't tighten, it opens. He becomes a grounding force, not an emotional mirror. And something remarkable happens. The chaos begins to settle. Not because he demanded peace, but because he embodied it. His calm becomes contagious. His tone regulates the room. His presence becomes something she can rest into, not because he told her to calm down, but because his energy made calm possible. This is emotional leadership in its highest form. And it doesn't come from dominating her or silencing her, it comes from having complete control over your own nervous system. It comes from knowing that storms pass, that tension has rhythm, and that your job isn't to shut her down, but to create a space stable enough for her emotion to move without destroying connection. Most women aren't used to this. They're used to men who either suppress them or surrender to them. They've rarely met a man who can feel without flinching, who can stay present without personalizing, who can stay steady while she tests the edges of his emotional frame. When she meets this man, everything changes. Because now, for the first time, she's with someone who doesn't need to win against her feelings and doesn't need to run from them either. He meets them, holds space for them, and leads the emotional tempo without ever saying he's in charge. And the result? Respect. Deep respect. Not because he forced it, but because she felt it. Not dominance, not submission, but strength she can trust. Strength she doesn't have to fight for. Strength that stands, not to control her, but to free her from performing. That kind of strength rewires how she relates to men entirely. Because she's not being handled. She's being led. There is a kind of silence that carries more power than any final word. A kind of goodbye that doesn't echo in rage or desperation, but in quiet, deliberate distance. That's the mark of an emotionally intelligent man who knows how to walk away. Not as a threat, not as a tactic, but as a principle, as an act of clarity, of self-respect. Most men don't know how to leave without drama. They break things on their way out. They shout, they beg. They linger in the energy of a relationship that already died long before the last fight. Because they mistake noise for closure, chaos for importance, attachment for love. But the emotionally intelligent man doesn't operate that way. He's not addicted to resolution. He doesn't chase peace from a situation that no longer honors him. He recognizes the moment when something shifts too far, when the dynamic turns from challenge to erosion. And when that moment comes, he doesn't explode. He doesn't try to prove he's right. He doesn't hold on longer than he should. He simply chooses to go with presence, not resentment, with silence, not submission. And that terrifies people. Because the man who can walk away with peace is the man who was never emotionally owned. He was present, he was engaged, but he was never dependent. He never needed to be needed. He gave his love freely, but never traded it for identity. And when the time comes, he doesn't burn bridges. He simply stops walking across them, not with bitterness, but with stillness. And that stillness haunts, because it reveals a level of inner freedom most people don't understand. Most people leave loudly because they hope to be chased. They cause damage because they don't know how to sit with loss. But this man, he simply walks. And because he doesn't look back, he becomes unforgettable. Machiavelli would call this the highest form of leverage. True power is not in your ability to dominate a situation, but in your ability to exit it with dignity. No reaction, no breakdown, just clarity. Because when you can leave something that once meant everything to you, not out of hatred but out of truth, you become dangerous in the most disciplined way. You no longer fight to be understood. You no longer argue for closure. You no longer give your peace away in pieces. You just walk calm, sovereign, unshaken. And here's the part no one talks about. A man like that doesn't just make a woman miss him. He makes her confront herself. Because when he leaves without making a mess, without leaving pieces behind to pick up, he reflects everything she once had and couldn't hold. This isn't cruelty, this is self-possession, the kind that isn't taught, it's built, slowly, through heartbreak, through detachment, through understanding that not everything that ends is a failure, and not everyone who walks away is weak. Sometimes walking away is the final act of strength, the final lesson, the final boundary. And when a man can do that not from coldness, but from calm, he doesn't just leave the relationship. He rises from it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to beg to be loved. And you never need to twist yourself into something smaller just to be accepted. What you need, what the world desperately needs, is stillness. A man who governs his own mind, not one ruled by it. A man who understands his emotions, but doesn't become enslaved to them. A man whose presence doesn't demand attention, but commands respect without a word. When you become emotionally intelligent, you don't become colder. You become clearer. You don't stop feeling you. Start feeling fully, without losing yourself. You don't stop loving. You just stop loving recklessly. You start choosing who gets your energy. You start protecting your peace like it's a kingdom. Because it is. And when a woman meets a man like that, she feels it. Not just in conversation, but in her nervous system. He doesn't react when tested. He doesn't chase when challenged. He doesn't cling when things change. He watches. He reads. He moves with calm, precise intention. That kind of man can't be managed. He can't be manipulated. He can't be forgotten. Not because he's perfect, but because he's whole. This is what separates a man who performs from a man who leads. This is the difference between noise and power, between charm and presence, between approval-seeking and self-respect. Women don't fear emotionally intelligent men because they're dangerous. They fear them because they're real, and realness can't be bent. So wherever you are in your life, dating, rebuilding, letting go, or standing at the edge of something new, remember this. You don't rise by being louder. You rise by becoming unshakable. You rise by mastering yourself, quietly, deliberately, not to impress, not to be chosen, but to walk into every room, every conversation, every relationship, knowing you've already chosen yourself. And if this message landed with you, if it stirred something deeper than agreement, don't just scroll away. Say something. Write a comment, even a few words. Speak the part of you that's waking up. It helps you remember. And it might help someone else too. If you know a man who needs this, share it, not to save him, but to remind him of who he's capable of becoming. Because in the end, the most dangerous man isn't the loudest. He's the one who doesn't flinch. And that man is you.